Happy New Year, golf friends, and welcome to day 2 of our inaugural V1 Sports Virtual Summit. Thank you to those that joined us yesterday. We had an incredible lineup of guest speakers and a whole bunch of fun. We worked with Brian Mogg, Mike Bender, Mr. Short Game, and a whole bunch of others. If you missed those seminars, they will definitely be available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel from that link in the chat window that the girls will post right now. Today we have another awesome day. Don't miss Terry Hash, Craig Trahan, and Cheryl Anderson later this afternoon. To see the full schedule, you can check out the link that the girls will post here in a minute. Feel free to register for each session so that you will get the link. And then if you do register, you will get a link to the video after it is posted on YouTube. We are offering PGA, MSR, and LPGA CU credits to all coaches attending. If you forgot to register with your number, you can email marketing@v1sports.com and Kelly will take care of submitting them for credit. To all of the folks that are joining us today, we absolutely love answering questions. You guys have an hour with one of the best instructors in the business, so please post questions in the window. I know that most of you are golf instructors, so this is a really great opportunity to have a one-on-one live dialogue with Mr. Dahlquist. I am Mandy Von C. I'm the Southeast Regional Sales Manager for V1 Sports. I am based in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. I absolutely love my job. I love my team, and I love supporting folks like Dana. V1 Sports is a 25-year-old company. We are the leader in delivering video analysis and instruction solutions to golfers, golf instructors, and tour players around the world. In addition to our software solutions, we provide hardware solutions, including high-speed cameras and computers, the V1 Pressure Mat, the world's most powerful portable solution to measure pressure, velocity, and dynamic force, also my favorite technology. And today, joining me, I'm so grateful, is our fearless CEO, our leader. Our entire team completely adores him. Just a little bit about Mr. Finnerty. He is an investor and entrepreneur at Opportunity Seed Capital, specializing in venture capital investments in sports and technology. After graduating from San Diego State with a sports marketing and finance degree, he was drafted by the Detroit Rockers, named Rookie of the Year, won an NPSL championship, named Series MVP, and earned a starting lineup of 4 all-star teams. We absolutely think he is our MVP. We love having him as our leader. And without further ado, our keynote speaker for our day 2 kickoff is a very, very special guest. I'm kind of starstruck because Dana Dahlquist is here. Dana is a Golf Digest top 50 teacher. He has worked with some of the best LPGA and PGA players in the biz. Dana Dahlquist has built one of the most successful online golf academies in the world and delivers more than 5,000 online lessons annually. 5,000 online lessons. I can't believe he's awake right now. You must be exhausted. In 2020, he delivered the 4th most online lessons among all of our thousands of golf academies. Really quickly before I move on, I want everyone to know that above Dana in that list are academies. They have lots of instructors. So for Dana to be 4th on that list by himself is a huge accomplishment. And he's over 5,000. I think it's 5,250 was the actual total, which is amazing. Dana has quite a Rolodex of students, and we are so grateful that you're sharing an hour of your time with us. Thank you so much. Brian and I are so grateful.
Great to be here. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Was that introduction okay? I didn't talk about how old you are.
No, it's beautiful. Beautiful. Absolutely.
I was going to say the same. Thank you, Mandy. Dana, welcome in. I mean, we're gonna sort of co-host this. Mandy will take the lead. I'll do a little bit of color. As she said, we're thrilled to get an hour with you. I think as most of us do. I'm going to probably speak more as a golfer. I know most of the people tuning in are golf pros, but we've had, because like we're talking about kind of pre-show here, one of the benefits of not being at the PGA show, and there's a lot of not benefits for being there. One of the benefits is we do get to invite golfers to be a part of this. With over 4 million golfers in our ecosystem, there are plenty of them like me that are just golf fanatics, you know, whether it's DIY or seeing a coach. And we just want to know more about how do coaches operate? How can I think about my game as a coach? So I know we're going to steer it towards online. That's really the context here. But just so you know, in the audience, plenty of golfers will be listening. And I think even some of us golf pros are, you know, secret tinkerers with our game for sure, if not so secret right out in front. So guys, if you have questions, put them in the chat, as Mandy said down below. We will do our best to kind of pick at them as we go rather than just bulk every single one of them at the end, but we will leave probably 10 or 15 minutes at the end to kind of do a rapid fire, if you will, at the end. We're going to do our best to get everybody's info in within the hour, but we do want to kind of leverage this time we have with Dana to make it all kind of come together. So with that, Dana, thank you so much for kicking off day 2. As Mandy said, thousands of golfers and pros joined us yesterday through our sessions, and I think we expect more of the same today, both live on Facebook and here in our chat, our fireside chat. So with that, Mandy, I'm going to throw it to you in just a second. My first question, Dana, is, so you're based here on the West Coast. Weather is awesome. We don't tend to think about sort of golf studios and academies. Our home base is Michigan, even though I'm from California, and we think about these housed places that everybody goes to, but you spend time indoor and out. Sounds like you also spend time with your guys on tour. Maybe just as an overview, talk to us about what does the online ability give you in terms of just being portable and being able to manage that business outside of just the 4 walls of, let's say, a teaching academy?
Yeah. So, there's a little bit of history to this, because I think if we go back to like 2004 in particular, 2003, I've always used video in my teaching from day one. And it was more or less 2 things. Number one, when I started, I was very aggressive as an individual with trying to obviously drum up business and trying to be eloquent in being descriptive in what I'm trying to teach people, whether it be mechanics or even expand my learning curve at the time. And so when you have access to video and being able to convey a message, it's a lot easier, even on a one-on-one position, to show somebody, somebody next to a tour player, what maybe a grip looks like, or an athletic setup, or whatever your message is. And, at that time, early 2000s, we, did it the old fashioned way. So we had the camera out, we ran a firewire into a computer. Personally, myself, then I'd go home, managed to stay married at home, because I was able to, for 45 to an hour, plug the thing into the computer and then email out video, or actually at the time was hosting it on a separate site. And when V1 basically came up with the capability of being able to send things through, your platform, that kind of curtailed my time. That was the first time that I saved an hour of my day. And then I can choose to be a better dad or expand my knowledge base. So it was like the first jump in technology that I noticed, especially on the video side, that gave me back a little bit more freedom. Now, as we fast forward, and obviously I can go on for forever, probably like 40 minutes on that, but we just experienced a unique situation where I looked at it as more an opportunity in many ways, with COVID and things locked down, more than a challenge, because businesses thrive in challenging environments. When everything's good, we tend to get a little complacent. And I've tried to expand that message to a lot of people, that right now is a time where you're either going to increase your knowledge base, reach out to people that you should be reaching out to, that need that. And I think what's interesting with golf, I know that we get, as an instructor, especially when I was young, I kind of lived and died by the mechanics of the swing, and didn't put as much emphasis on the relationship building aspect. So with technology now, you have the ability to do that. You can do both. And people want that connection, and I experienced that heavily during COVID, because I was locked down for upwards of 5 months, not being able to teach personally. Now, that didn't mean that I didn't build a teaching bay in my backyard, which I did, but there was people that were sensitive, that didn't want to do face-to-face, which I understand. So this kind of developed a different avenue in that regard. Now, to expand on that, in 2006, I had an online portal forum. There was a couple out there, including GolfWorks and whatnot. And mine specifically was more geared towards swing instruction. And what was kind of the unique facet was it was the first time that I was able to connect with people across the globe. And so, it started off the first couple months as just being local, and this is prior to Facebook even. And all of a sudden, people were looking at my lessons from Austria and from China. And, now with Instagram and social media, that's just exploded. So, I think all in all, and you guys have seen this, I do put some V1 material on my social media because it's the best way to show people what you're doing. And, it's one thing to just stand up there and give a presentation and that's another avenue. But when people can actually see what you're doing and how you're doing it, it blows other things out of the water.
Well, I think that's a wrap for us today. We've got our shameless plug. Thank you very much. You taking my job because that's what I'm supposed to do. But no, I appreciate that because, and by the way, for the younger teachers out there, Firewire is what we used to have to connect our handheld cameras to our computers. And much like dial-up internet, if you ever heard of that, you'd wait for it to download. So to Dana's point, getting time back in your day, I will transition into a serious point. I mean, that is a driver for V1. We know that with over 17,000 pros on our platform, some as successful as Dana, right, doing thousands of lessons and 5,000 lessons a year is absolutely phenomenal and incredible. But our goal really is to give you back time in your day, to do more lessons if that's a choice, to spend more time with your kids. And we live that at home. So I'm glad you brought that up because it really is, it's important for our team to hear because a lot of times we're working on things and you wonder if there's an impact, but over 25 years, we've really tried to say, how can we give the golf professionals more time in their day and then leave a blank there to do whatever they'd like to do. Again, for some, it's doing more to create a little more revenue, for others, just to get more time back and some sanity in life. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
No,
Mandy, over to you.
Cool, thanks. So Dana, I want to go way back a little bit, if that's okay. And I always sort of challenge my co-hosts because when we have a platform, I like to sort of know where you started. Like I had Keith Bennett is a professional snowboarder, for example, turned golf instructor. Brian's a professional soccer player turned fearless leader. You are a self-proclaimed range rat.
Yeah.
You grew up on the range. So after all these years in the golf world and you sort of started on the range, can you talk about way back when and specifically your teaching philosophy? I mean, I know you're all about, you got to see it, right?
Yeah.
Seeing it. So can go back to that and sort of talk to us a little bit about how you, that philosophy, how you started that, 20 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No problem.
Same age.
Yeah. So being a Southern California guy, I had a little more access to essentially the macro Grady side of things. So it was originally based at a young age to that system, which kind of taught a somewhat, I guess you can say like a systematic approach to looking at the golf swing. And so that's kind of the foundation. And what was interesting over time, and we talked about Chris earlier, like individuals like that. So when you have a base and you're kind of putting yourself into a box, and over time you start realizing that other things exist, and so you start to expand into more of what the 3D realm is doing and what the pressure traces are doing, the center mass is doing, what TrackMan did to the industry, and a bunch of things. And what's interesting is it kind of, it's not like I have a certain way of teaching. I have kind of approach to teaching. So if somebody, on their video is doing something and you see that's the problem, and a lot of guys have done this beautifully over the last several years, is you're able to actually kind of go back into the swing and look on camera where that originates from. And that's something originally I didn't do because I kind of boxed people in. And just over time, just learn how to put things together so that they all kind of match up. But I think what's really interesting, and I had this question posed about 2 weeks ago, is somebody said to me, what kind of technology would you use? Like if you were a teacher starting off, I think, we take it for granted, the iPhone, right? And the iPad. And it's really the least expensive tool you can do because you can use your app on it. you have your phone, you can send it to your students. You don't need to go out and spend, $20,000 on a radar machine, which in fact doesn't really communicate a lot of the information you need. But through experience of using all the tech, it still comes back to the camera. And at this point, you can see kind of what the pressure's doing if you have experience. You can kind of see what the ball does if you have experience. It's not always going to be exact, and quite frankly, nor is pressure always going to be exact. So, but it gives you the best case scenario. And I think, the new iPhone 12 camera is really, really clear. And obviously my wife got one before I did, number one. And so I'm kind of jealous. I'm like, oh, that camera's a lot better. But it's amazing just within 4 years how the quality keeps improving. And it's just kind of exciting to me because I just see where the future's going with this whole thing. So yeah, I think especially for the young people that are getting into this, I've being a little bit older in teaching, about 20 years now, it's kind of like you have to relay a little bit of hope to them that, life is going to be originally when you start off a little bit of a struggle. And that's kind of the meaning of the life. Every philosopher talks about that in many different genres or religions. And that's where you're learning your technique and your style and your communication skills. And right now it's a great way to kind of create market share. So whether it be locally or internationally. So, kind of keep your chin up right now and kind of deep dive into, these technologies because they're only going to help you. And I found that it's a massive importance that you always have your camera with you. You always have your camera charged. You have everything updated. So you're ready to rock and roll when, you hit the range.
Awesome.
Dean,
Thank you.
let me use that as a segue to a really tight topic. And Richard Hughes, hi, Richard, one of our favorites as well from over the pond, had asked, and I think this is a great question for whether you're a longtime teacher or you're kind of new to this whole thing about online, which again is kind of the topic here. How do you plan an in-person lesson versus an online lesson? Right? Because I think for all of us as teachers, you're going to say, I definitely know what it's like to do a lesson on the range or in the studio, right? That's kind of how we got in this business. But for those that are new to the online thing, yeah, what's your philosophy or difference between an online lesson, your planning perspective from an in-person or online perspective?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, I set aside certain times through the day to do both. So if you don't plan, you're kind of not, I hate to say planning to fail, but it's not going to be as, thoughtful. And I think the big thing with success is that there's a level of thoughtfulness that has to come first. And so if you're going to do a successful lesson, you have to set aside the time. And so in a normal online experience, I'll do that one first. I have kind of a folder built specifically that goes in different ranges. So I have hypermobile tour player to maybe a +2 handicap guy who's not as mobile, and them hitting different types of shots. So whether it be like off-speed iron shots to full iron shots, long irons, and drivers. And I have that available to me so that I have access. And it's very easy to do in the tabs to put that together. Now, when I do this, and it's very, very easy, is I generally have a FaceTime situation where I bring that up and I book like an hour of time or 30 minutes, depending on the individual, what they want to do. And they either pre-send swings or they send swings after that first conversation. So, like yesterday I had a person from Australia and from Victoria area, and he's a young, aspiring professional, good player. And what we did is we basically did a FaceTime lesson and he sent 4 swings. And within that time, it was kind of a before and after scenario. And then I brought up a couple models that are kind of within his build and what his framework is, and then kind of moved them along. And then after that's done, I could either, do a presentation, on V1 of here's what you need to work on, and then send that independently. But to be fair, if at the end of the session, he has 2 videos, kind of a before and after, And generally speaking, you see people make change. And the flip side of this, what's kind of interesting, is that when you have people creating change and they're in a online environment, they're actually able to make changes to their swing a lot easier. When you're on the driving range, there's so much like worry about their attention's on the ball so much. It's hard for them to make physical changes. And obviously for a better player, it's a little bit easier. But at the same token, it's visual, so they can see that their feel versus real is substantially different. Now, when we go to the on-course lesson, generally what we do is somewhat of the same thing, is that the first, part of the lesson is kind of watching them do what they do. And, I had a beginner out, somewhat beginner, I mean, probably 25 handicap yesterday morning. And I filmed kind of how they walked into a ball. So sometimes they're so attentive to what they're doing with their hands, their wrist angles, whatever it is, and which is important, but how they walked in and their mannerisms wasn't like it was natural. It was very forced. So being able to film that and then putting on V1 and then having a professional walk in and taking their address position, they can kind of see the differences.
All right.
It's fascinating that you start at that early, even that early, not 75% of the way into a lesson, start filming. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. I have a couple comments from your earlier answer. Just so everyone knows, the iPad and the iPhone have a 240 frames per second camera. So Dana's talking about a super high speed camera. That is the same frames per second that we would try to sell you as far as a high speed actual video camera. So the mobile devices, the iPhone and the iPad, absolutely awesome tools, hardware to use to get great quality. And the iPhone 12, of course, is even better. Also, you made a comment that you post some videos to your social media. And as you know, because I'm like a super fan, he does not post some, he posts a lot of videos. So you guys, the girls will put Dana's Instagram handle, go follow it. It's really great to see his before and afters and side by sides. Thank you for doing that. I know you see me posting and giving you shout outs for all the V1 videos. I love it. And then also we had a question, and like going way back when, we had somebody ask, who influenced you the most and who taught you the most? Who's your mentor?
Question. Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say Mac was really the number one guy. I think when it comes to kind of the understanding and the base, he was the guy who had the most influence. And it's interesting because with all the stuff that's come out the past 10 years that I somewhat deep dive into, and I don't necessarily become a vocal debater about it because I don't think it serves anything. But that's a little bit of my personality, I guess. But you kind of realize going back to kind of what the old school players did, and a lot of this stuff actually coincides. So when you look at Sam Snead or Hogan or Jack Nicklaus and all these different individuals, you can kind of see their movement. And I think that's important because you can see the dynamics of the body, what it's doing on top or outside of not only the alignments. And you start to see how those things are formed. So when you do run a video, sometimes it's good to do it in slow-mo, sometimes it's to do it in full speed, because you can kind of see the movement and you can see the alignments and see how those both mesh based off also the new information that we have out there about the golf swing and how it's powered. Powering the swing is an important factor. We're talking about Bryson, about creating momentum, or Kyle Berkshire, how they move on the ground. And there's different rates to that, because you see a Jack Nicklaus who was a very long hitter, but there's a subtlety to it. So those things are important, because a lot of times and this is a preference of mine, not a rule, but I tend to have my players move around a little bit more than I did 5 or 6 years ago. And I've tried to become as malleable as possible in my thinking. So I don't try to hang my hat on anything, because I'm going to see something different tomorrow. And, I try to tell that to the young teachers, kind of like when I started, I was Bambi. and I'm going out into the forest, and at some point tragedy is going to happen, and the forest has to teach me. So don't be set in my ways. Make sure that I'm able to learn from the chipmunk. You can't be set, because once you do, you stop learning and you essentially will die. So I think it's important that we can kind of observe everything, and I think social media is good for that, because you see what other teachers are doing.
Yep.
And I appreciate that, and I think they're taking a leap of faith to put something out there. And there's obviously going to be criticism, there's going to be online trolling, there's going to be a lot of things, but that's kind of a time where you have to be strong in kind of your personality, not to be combative or anything. Just go, okay, I understand how you feel about that. This is what I do, however. So yeah, I think, even though I answered a whole bunch of stuff, but I say that, your foundation's important as long as you keep expanding on it.
Right, right. So teach all of the golf instructors out there, or tell us, how do we go about building an online business? Where do you start? Website, social media, V1? But I'm a new instructor. I'm asking the number 4 guy giving 5,000 lessons. You obviously have a successful online business.
Yeah.
After that, my follow-up question is, what is your rate? What is your rate as compared to online or remote?
Yeah. So typically online, it's around 150 an hour. In person is 300. Now, I base that pretty much on a couple factors. I could charge a lot more in person because I'm pretty much booked, but I don't think that I should charge more than that. I have a problem with that. I think there's a scalability situation if that needs to be talked about, if I need to charge more than that, because there's a lot of people. That's a lot of money. Now, obviously, demographically, Los Angeles, it's more available to do such, but yeah, that's where I kind of draw the line. Now, when I go to building a business, and specifically on online, the sky's the limit. So I think you need to make sure that you have a 360-degree view on everything, just like you would with your golf game, right? You have a fitness aspect, mental aspect, everything, time management, whatever you want to call it. So you do need to set aside time to do this, and it's about consistency. So if you're looking at social media, I'm a daily poster on Instagram. So my Instagram is kind of a feed to me, to my personality, or to my behavior. And when you're looking at it, you want to make sure that you can be engaging, you can be, I would say the most important thing is to be authentic, to be actually you, and don't try to be anybody else. And then what'll happen is people will be attracted to your personality. And so that's number one. It's not necessarily what you're saying in the content, it's that you're just putting it out there. Now, when you go to maybe YouTube, it might be once a week or twice a week you upload something, and you can choose whatever that content is. So once again, it's not really what is the content, it's just being consistent. I think that's number one. And then you can dive into maybe a website. So websites, they're generally not cost effective at the forefront, but they're kind of the end tool. And because social media will bring people to you, they'll use the technology, they'll do all those things, but the website turns into the scalability situation. So, and YouTube as well, because you'll make money on that. But I think the first thing is build exposure on social media, and the back end will be the website.
I love that. I just want to reiterate, you guys, that's so good. Social media, to be authentic. We have a director of social media, and she did a little presentation to us, and she said, be authentic and be who you are, be what you, and I appreciate that, because I'm known to be kind of wild, and I often pretend like I'm the best dancer in the room. But anyway, also be consistent. That's so great. Thank you. I have a question about your student demographics. We spoke about this yesterday. I think this is really, really interesting, that your student demo, can you talk about your student demographics and the number of students that are local, the number of students you have met and have not met?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. And, I've been teaching on the tour for roughly 10 years. And that's a lot of travel. And Southern California is really nice where I live. So I don't like leaving very much. So one of the benefits to having an online business is I don't have to leave. So, and you're kind of at beck and call to tour players. So it was kind of interesting. Like this year was a little refreshing because I didn't travel a whole bunch. And I mean, unfortunately, I lost 2 tour players, but then I gained 2 more. So it wasn't, I thought all of a sudden I was retired from teaching on tour, but that wasn't the case. But, and so, that's one little aspect of it. But generally speaking, the mass of what I do is in-person lessons. So I'm a 6-day-a-week guy that teaches at a public driving range in Long Beach. It's a good facility. It's public. It's, t-shirts and shorts, sandals. And, I probably look overdressed when I'm there, but I'm trying to relate to everybody. And then, on top of that, I have the online business. Now, demographically with the online business, it's unique because I have a lot of people from Europe, obviously the United States, but my subscriber base, which is interesting, is 80% in the Asia areas and specifically Korea.
Asia, 80%, you guys, 80. I just want to make sure everyone heard that. 80% of his students are in Asia.
Yes. And because of that, one thing that I have is I have an online academy that I'm with Grant Waite and Chris Como I'm involved with. So, and that's specifically in Korea, and there's 2 facilities there that have teachers. So, so what's going to happen is that there's going to be obviously a different mindset how they look at things. And, every country is a little different, and specifically in Asia, China, and Korea specifically, and a little bit in Japan, is they think of it more from an engineering type perspective. So they're very visual. They see things that they like and they want to understand it. So, I think it's a pretty cool thing because here in the States, it's a different mindset. And I think that's actually changing because kids coming up now are being more technical. Not that is everything, it's just some of it. But that's what's interesting. And I think when more coaches, create involvement overseas, specifically in Asia, they're going to get the other side of it, which is more of the mindset and, motor learning skills and how to play. So, but at this time, it's very weighted in the mechanic. I just saw that, Linda. That's funny. When do I sleep? I have a Whoop strap. I time it.
Robert Boyle has a question. How does a golfer upload his or her swings to you, Dana? The V1 app is great, but can someone simply use their iPhone and send it? Robert, Dana only accepts videos through V1 Golf. No, I'm totally kidding. I'm kidding. You can submit them to Dana via his website, or you can, if you have V1 Golf, you can select Dana as your instructor and send him one of your voiceovers. Dana, really quickly, a question, and then we want to see some of your lessons. We want to see some tour players. But really quickly, you told me something the other day or yesterday when we were testing about how you do in-person lessons. And I talk to a lot of golf instructors all day, and they say, oh, every afternoon when I go home and I do my voiceovers. You do voiceovers a little bit differently during your lessons. Can you talk about that? Might have something to do with how we've got 5,000 voiceovers, but can you talk about in person? I know you do multiple during the lesson. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So generally every lesson has 2 to 3 videos. And so what happens is at the beginning of the lesson, I basically film. Now I film in crop. So I have my iPad out there and I kind of see what they do and how they warm up and whatnot. And right then and there, I do the first part of the lesson. So they kind of know where you start because it's all about how you start, how you warm up. And I think that's important because, I'm not just trying to get a guy to look like we're going to be looking at like Xander Schauffele and Charles Howell in a minute, but I'm not trying to get somebody in that box. So, but I'm trying to move them closer to a better position or a better movement. I prefer to say better movement. So they kind of see that right off the get-go, because what happens generally is I give them information, and if they leave, they didn't know where they started. So they are going down the wrong pathway. So this kind of makes sure that they are able to curtail that situation, get into a specific first movement, and then they intellectually go, okay, yeah, I remember what I was doing then with Dana, so now I can make that change quicker. And the more often they touch that, the faster the change happens. And that's important. You kind of want to acclimate your body for movement and doing it the right way. So you have to start the lesson early, right from the get-go.
That's so cool. I love the fact that before people are even putting their clubs in their trunk from the lesson, they're already getting voiceovers in their phone. I mean, that's very sticky. What a way to keep a customer, engaged and coming back. And the amount of work they're seeing you put in during the lesson to communicate to them before they get to their car is so cool. But you guys listening, just remember that you can do your voiceovers on the fly during a lesson in front of your student. And that keeps you from having to do it between the 10 minutes that you have to grab a Coke between lessons or after hours in the evening. Okay, so I've got a question, and then we would love to see some of those tour players. Let's see. Claude is asking how much the fact that you have tour players, how much does the fact that you have tour players help your reputation to build the business and exposure?
Yeah, it definitely helps. There's no lie to that. I think, I'm a little different. So like every coach out there has a particular personality, and I'm kind of the guy that will be super honest if something works or doesn't work. And that unfortunately tends to hurt me a little bit, because there's, and it could be mindset, let's be fair. If you're playing at the highest level, you generally occupy a certain mindset being out there. Okay. And sometimes they're kind of stuck in that certain place. And so that generally is the first thing you have to, twist. And then it goes into, why are they asking me for help? Okay. So it could be something mechanical or whatnot. So, and then from that point, it's kind of a done deal. So the off season is important, because that's when you're actually going to look at making an assessment, what needs to change for the year. And beyond that point, it becomes a management situation. And, I'm not good at that part. I'm good to a point, but I'm going to be honest, because I look at them like they're my kids, and I can't just say, oh, it's okay. I have to be like, hey, that's not exactly what you need to be doing. You need to be doing this. So it's one of the reasons why a lot of guys bounce around, because they have access to easy information. Sometimes that information isn't correct. And so that's one of the hard things. It's why I really appreciate, the up and coming players or the average golfer a lot, because they just want to play better. And it's an easier relationship. Now, obviously, to answer your question, it does help the marketing aspect, having, somebody who's on TV. But at the same time, they're human beings, and you have to, treat them as human beings. So I think that's a really important thing. So if you do have the notion or the willingness to say, hey, that's something I want to do in my career, is help some of the best players, fair enough. I would do it. And along the way, it is a good learning curve, because you could tell them the right thing and they just won't do it because of other reasons. And that's why some guys like the Harmon legacy essentially has been so successful, because they are honest with their players. So Butch will say it like it is, and whether the player likes it or not, at the end of the day, Butch said what was honest to his student, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and I would say, as we transition into seeing some of Dana's videos and then getting to Q&A, on the V1 platform, tens of thousands of pros. And to Dana's point, hopefully what you're hearing is being really intentional about what you're doing. If you're interested as a pro to go down that path, talk to other pros that are there, because some of them will tell you it's not worth it, right? Between the travel, the time away, the bouncing around, you may be better off just not having tour pros in your sort of quiver, because you do something differently. For others, certainly like the Harmon legacy, and there's, Ledbetter, and you can go on to the number of guys, they really fit that mold well, and it does really good for them, and it adds in as it does to Dana. So there isn't a one size fits all here for sure. It isn't like if you have a tour pro, you're going to be successful. I think Dana would say that for sure.
Yeah.
In some cases, having a tour pro means you don't make as much money because you're spending time kind of chasing that person around, or those people around. So just to be sure, it's not one or the other. You can make it work if that's what works for you. And I want everybody to hear that that there is not a one size fits all in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Dana, can we see some of those videos?
Yeah. So specifically, so let me see, we'll go, can you guys see that okay?
Not yet. You got to hit.
Let me screen share and share. There we go. Does
go.
that work?
Yep.
It is.
Beautiful. I'm going to move this over a little bit. So I have, this is a little bit older video. I don't work with Charles right now, but Charles is on the right, and Xander Shoffley, who I don't work with, but he's a friend of mine, is on the left. So what's very interesting, well, at least at this time, this is actually a good example here, is we're looking at particular address situations, okay? And obviously for this topic, because it's more visible, I tend to use the driver. So as an example, because people ask me all the time, do you need to have pressure plates? And I said, well, if you have some experience on them, you don't necessarily need them. So, I know I do have a body track. I use it sometimes, don't use it a lot, but I do. Depends on where I'm going and if how mobile I am. But if you look here, what I was trying to expand with Charles at the time is that if you look at Xander on the left, you can see that he moves off the ball before really the club really kind of moves. And so as that club, and you can see his left toe kind of come up. So there's pressure moving to the trail leg. Now, that whether we call that a trigger in the swing or a pre-shot movement, I like to call it momentum, essentially, or like a horizontal force momentum. That's happening. And then with Charles's swing, we put two lines on the hip, put one kind of on the head here, we'll see a little bit different. Not as much. And what's interesting is the next thing I would say to the individual is look at the difference, even though I know they're different clubs, is where the handle is relative to the right foot because of the lack or the more amount of momentum being created. So you can see that the hands are closer to the right thigh, this a little bit longer. Generally speaking, a driver is going to have more, but that's just something to communicate. So if you have a player that's very handsy off the ball, as an example, this is a good way to illustrate that. And so then as the player goes to the top, you're going to see that there's probably more loading or more of a loaded look in the right hip with Xander than with Charles at this time. Now, this isn't Charles's current swing, so it doesn't matter. But just at that time, you'll see that. And this is one of the cool things, because if you do use the body track and you do use, different ways of measuring, whether you take somebody into a pressure lab or whatever, these are good ways to illustrate what you're seeing, and pay close attention to a lot of these alignments on film as they correspond to what you're seeing on the ground or what other players are doing. Now, when we see that with an amateur player, sometimes these things are not as easily done. So you can kind of spectrum a player out. Like if I had 5 or 6 examples here, I could show that some players are going to be closer to where Charles is. Some are going to be maybe with a higher handicap player, they're going to be further to the right than where Xander is. So, but it kind of gives you a time and space situation, which is generally what I do in a lesson, is try to illustrate time and space. Even though we're looking at a stop frame, if I move that frame a couple frames down, like right here, you can see that not only is the pelvis different, but where the arms are and where the rib cage is. So it's important to note, and this is one of the issues I have with taking one picture. One picture is not illustrating the whole entire narrative. So movement is an important part in looking at video. It's probably one of the number one things I tell people is like, look at everything before the club even moves, because it's telling the story kind of similar to a domino effect. And I think that's really, really important to look at. When I was younger, I was hanging my hat on a lot of specific alignments and taking not account into how the movement is. And what happens generally is when you do that, that you have a lack of control over the system because it's pulling the athlete away from how the system should work. Because case in point, if I was throwing a baseball or throwing a football, I really don't think of many things. I worry more about the movement and the timing than I really worry about what specifically is going on in the swing itself. So that's kind of where my mindset goes with this. And this is a good way to kind of see like the differences. Now, some of these are specific. So some players have unique situations that occur. And sometimes we take that into account, especially with a better player, because we have to be sensitive of that. We don't want to say, hey, you know, we have to have it all fit into a box. Sometimes some of these little nuances are some of the ways and means that they're able to become successful in the first place. So, but if you obviously spend more time on the range, look at more golf swings, look at more video, those things start to expose themselves more often, and your learning curve will expand.
Awesome. I host a Tuesday Trace every Tuesday to educate instructors on how to use the pressure mat. I've done, I think, 16 of them. Never have we had somebody be able to look at a swing and have so much knowledge and understanding of how you're working with the ground and know how they're working with the ground without a pressure mat. That is so awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I mean, that is, you guys pay attention, because that is to know the body positions based on what they're doing is pretty high level. Thanks for sharing that, Dana.
No problem.
And also, question, we have the largest tour model database. Do you ever show the tour models, other or tour players? Do you compare them to other tour players? How do they?
I do, yeah, and it's specific. So here's a good example. So I have favorites. So this one's not. This is Victor Hovland. So I worked with Victor for about a year, and then here's one of the models. We'll go this one here. So here's Tommy Fleetwood, if you guys can see. So I use Tommy a lot. I know I have a preference to certain players aesthetically. So the famous one is Adam Scott in the pink shirt. I think it's gold. So I don't think you can find one online or on his Instagram that's as good. So kudos to you guys on that. So I use that almost every day. Now, there's some relationships that go on within the golf swing. And this one's kind of the online, how would you say, hot trend of last year, 2019, which was always the shallowing of the shaft, or whatever you want to call it. Now, what's interesting is, like, I don't necessarily, make everybody do the same thing, but principally I try to make sure that certain things are occurring, and without getting into like specific details, but I like players, especially if they are a newer player, to create more depth in their swing, in their pelvis. And I like the arms to be more in for a newer player. I like them to hit out on a golf ball more than across. Just kind of the 101 stuff that you would hear. And I also tend to like a newer player to have a stronger face position, so not an open club face. So all those things that I would say that the mass of teachers on the range every day pretty much know now. And I have, hopefully learned from, knowledgeable people when they have talked about this. So as an example to that, so for a player that, struggles with the open club face, I would show this one in particular, Victor Hovland. And you can see that the left wrist is in this, more closed looking position. It's relatively speaking. And the player also has, hip rotation and lead arm depth to some amount. Now, this doesn't, I don't have time to explain that, but there's different ways to create depth. Okay, so we don't need to go down that road right now. Another thing that's interesting about Victor is a person that gets the mass of the shaft pointing inside the ball fairly early. So he doesn't have the club pointing outside the ball like a Rory McIlroy or Dustin Johnson. So DJ will have a little less depth at this point, hands a little bit more out in front of him. But for a lot of people that are slicers, this is a great look, okay? But there's a contrary, okay? Because in reality, most golfers on the PGA Tour do not possess lead wrist flexion at the top. They have some amount of extension of the lead wrist. So if you look at Victor, he's kind of removed that piece. And, is it a necessity? No, it's a variable. But it's one less variable to potentially worry about. The only thing that's interesting is if you looked at the longest hitters in the world, they have left wrist extension because it potentially could be a power source. So if you're struggling with power, going to a Victor route, if you're not mobile and dynamic and you want to hit it 20 yards further, that might be a conversation to have. May or may not be. There's always that in question. But what they both possess is through the transition, that club, and this is a good way of kind of showing this, the mass of the club flattens right through the transition. So when they land, in particular, maybe close to their left ball or foot, the shaft starts to move in a way that it starts to shallow away from that point. And that's what you see with most good players. So you'll see this with Fleetwood as well. Now, obviously, both these players rotate real well with the ground. They both kind of landed the ball their left foot, and you see the shaft behave very similarly, even though they both have different wrist conditions. Okay, and that's important to know. Now, because they do that, their body, without getting into crazy conversations or anything, and this is more of a high-level conversation, is they're able to create separation between their hips and their rib cage. Okay, and that's kind of, we call it the slinging system of the body, essentially, so that when they land underneath the left foot, they're able to rotate their lower body, upper body, creates kind of a twisting effect. And because 60% of my lessons physically can't do that, even though they see it online, we might not use these guys as the example, but I use a lot of kids with these two individuals because Adam Scott doesn't do this much, right? And he's a very nice ball striker. So that's why it's important to kind of look at the models you're using and then what particularly are they doing within their swing that's usable, and then what's not usable for, maybe another guy. But for guys that don't rotate real well, and you're trying to teach them to do that, I think the Fleetwood one's great because now this is just my general opinion. What's interesting is if you watch Tommy Fleetwood actually do a practice swing, it's nothing really like what he does in his full swing, because when he lands underneath his left foot, his pelvis is already open before his hands get to his right shoulder. So then when he gets down to here, his pelvis is really, really open. So it's just kind of an interesting note because guys that kind of stall out or girls that stall out, this is a good one to show people.
That's awesome. We love those models, right?
Yeah.
And thank you for your comment about Adam Scott. Kelly filmed that swing. Kelly, our director of marketing, she just sent us a note. She's very excited that you like it.
Perfect camera angle.
Steve Schaff has a question. Camera positioning. We take all of our model swings down the hand line. Some coaches prefer different lines. This is how we do it for the model database. Hey, I have a question for you, Dana. Kind of came from the Mike Bender seminar yesterday. Of course, he works with a lot of tour players. Do you ever work with the caddies? Do you ever have them film swings on tour? How does that work? What's the relationship there?
Yeah, that's always an interesting one. I look at caddies like parents, okay, because the caddies have a financial interest in who they're caddying for. And sometimes, and not specifically me, but I've seen it, caddies and teachers tend to be at odds. And I think you need to develop a relationship with those caddies and bring them into the fold and look at them like they're the actual parent of a child. And when you do that, they genuinely know that you care and you can have open dialogue and discussions. Now, what's interesting is that sometimes caddies have a narrative that they've heard from other coaches and whatnot. And if you have that, roadblock or whatnot, you just have to kind of accept it. And then hopefully over time that changes. Doesn't always happen that way. A lot of caddies are strong personalities and rightfully so, they should. That's why they're there. So, but I appreciate input from them because they're part of the team. And I think that how they talk about you when you leave is important. And, even if it's subtle, try to make sure that you show them appreciation for the amount of work that these guys do. Because it's a lot, they're kind of in the same position you're in. You're away from your family, they're working, they're early, hopefully. They're staying late, they're walking the golf course 2 or 3 times, more than what you expect. And then, they're doing the practice rounds and it's a tough lifestyle. So I think, if you're enthusiastic about what they're doing, I think it's number one, getting that relationship firmed.
Awesome. So we only have 3 minutes left. And from someone that's done over 5,000 lessons, what is your advice for golf instructors? Voiceover video lesson tips and tricks. What do we absolutely have to include there?
Yeah, I think, and this is me, so this doesn't naturally have to be you, but I think is setting up people to have a game plan. Whenever you look at anything, you have to, if you're going to go get shoulder surgery, I'd rather get an MRI than have a witch doctor tap me on the shoulder. So even though it's convenient to have a witch doctor do that, it's just not going to be the best case scenario 90% of the time. So when somebody comes and takes a lesson, kind of lay out the whole thing, and I know that can be difficult at times, but what happens is people want to, as an example, want to know why they chicken wing their left arm. Okay. And you have to backtrack the whole system to show them why. Because then it brings a level of understanding that why they've done that for 25 years. So what's interesting is that if you do that, they can start making total motion that doesn't do it anymore without trying to really fix the chicken wing. So, and that's kind of probably the most important thing, is that you don't just specifically work on one thing at a time, because what happens is, what about the other stuff that they're concerned about? Because they're not going to tell you everything. They might tell you, well, some do, but not all of them. But you have to make sure that, in my opinion, the whole roadmap is laid out. And then I do put a timeline on it. So and that not only is a challenge for my students, it's a challenge for me. I think that's the fun part about this, is that you can really kind of scope out a timeline for a player. And I work within quarter of the year increments with every player. So if you're a beginner or you're a tour player, you have a quarter of the year to do X, Y, and Z. Now, if we hit that mark, that's fantastic. But if we move closer to it, that's fantastic too. What will be the end result is they understand what they're doing. So that's how I work on things.
Awesome.
Thanks, Dana. I think that's, again, the takeaways. I know we're right on 10 o'clock, so I'm going to race through this. But if you've taken anything away from the idea of moving from a range or an academy to an online business and doing that, what has been very clear in this time with Dana is be intentional, have a game plan, communicate with your students, right? All those things you can do in our system, in our app. You can do them other different ways, of course. But I think building that intentionality into where are we now, right? That starts at the warm-up part of the lesson. And again, whatever videos gets sent in and reviewed, that they know this isn't just a one-hit wonder, right? It's not the witch doctor approach. If you want to build a lasting online relationship with a student, you've got to have a game plan. You've got to prepare and be intentional. So kind of leave you with those nuggets for sure. I would also say, I know there's a host of questions that have come through. We don't have time to get to all of them. So we will, as a staff, review the chat online and then get your answers answered after this session. So be patient with us as we respond to you, because we had questions like frames per second, how do you build a thing, what if you don't have YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll send you some ideas that we've had through our sessions here, but we really appreciate you guys tuning in. Dana, thanks so much. Mandy, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, Dana, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I just really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing all of your information. And thank you for all that hard work to do 5,000 voice lessons to continue grow the golf business. I really appreciate you spending this hour with us. Thank you.
Anytime, absolutely. All
I'll
right,
see you in
guys.
San Diego in a couple of
Have a
weeks,
good day.
Dana.
Bye,
Absolutely.
guys. Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
everyone.